Welcome to the CIO Evolution. In this podcast, we'll explore the Chief Information Officer's role in executing a new ongoing leadership imperative, digital transformation that promotes agility and resilience. How do CIOs upgrade legacy networks? What are the financial challenges CIOs face? And what are the security measures that are required in the new work from anywhere, mobile and cloud-based world?
Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Jablonski, Director of CXO Revolutionaries and Community. We have a treat for you today. Joining us is Bruce Lee, former CIO and CTO, and now a CXO advisor at Zscaler, among many other things. This summer, Bruce, you wrote an article for CXO Revolutionaries called How CXOs Can Prepare to Support the Innovation Horizons That Drive Growth. Thank you for that contribution. It's had a lot of traffic. And now we're going to dive into it and explore the horizons. The article was inspired by a book called The Alchemy of Growth, Practical Insights for Building the Enduring Enterprise. And it seems like it had a lasting effect on you. Is that safe to say, Bruce?
It is, yeah. And it had a lasting effect because I didn't just read the book. Truth be told, I read some of it, but not all of it. But what I did do was live the experience of implementing what was in the book in my time at Fannie Mae. And this Horizons model to growth is a really good one for helping CXOs really come to grips with how Horizon and innovation thinking impacts what you need to do to be ready for it. If you're totally in a reactive mode, it's kind of too late. This Horizons model gives you a chance to be proactive and to think about how innovation is going to affect what you need to do. So I love it. I think it's a really great framework, Chris.
It's a great framework. I think it's much needed. You know, what the topic of innovation, as critical as it is, you hear so much about it, but you don't necessarily see like the ingredients or the framework.
Yeah.
There's so many concepts embedded within, design thinking, and it's refreshing to see this book, even though it's a couple decades old, still having a lot of relevance. So the book itself, among many things, shows the secret to managing business opportunities across these three time horizons we're going to talk about. One is extending and defending the core business. So I guess that's the here and now. Building new businesses, that's Horizon 2. And then seeding options for the future, which would be Horizon 3. So let's just jump right in. Can you elaborate on the concept of this three horizons model and how it specifically applied to the fields of technology and innovation within the large enterprises that you worked in, like Centene and Fannie Mae?
Sure. I think one of the first things is to dispel the idea that the horizons represent strictly time sequences. Some people think Horizon 1 is quick, Horizon 2 is medium term, and Horizon 3 is in the long term. It's not really like that. The horizons represent how far you're looking into the future from where you are today, both in time, but also in scope of your business. The sort of higher you get, 1, 2, 3, the further into the future you're looking. So in Horizon 1, as you said, you're looking at the current business. Horizon 2, you're looking at what comes next. And Horizon 3, you're really looking at threats and so on. And I find this particularly useful because innovation as a topic within large enterprises is often very contentious. People think it's the cool stuff. You get to do the innovation. There's often sometimes teams that run the innovation lab, all this kind of stuff. Innovation becomes a cultural asset in a company, and people fight over that cultural asset. I think what the Horizons model does is it sets out very clearly that kind of everybody's involved in innovation, just at these different horizons. And that gives a framework for people to think about it as a discipline, innovation as a discipline separated in these horizons. And for IT leaders, that helps you prepare for what type of innovation is going to hit you from, and who your stakeholders are and what your response can be, rather than leaving you flailing with just this one word, innovation, that can mean anything to anyone, really. So I find it useful for that reason. And I think as we talk and get into examples in the different horizons, that will become more obvious.
So Horizon 1 is looking at the current business model. Do you have any examples of companies that have successfully implemented Horizon One innovations?
Yes, and I think most companies do it all the time. But I think a good example, and we can use it throughout the chat today, is looking at something that everyone's familiar with, like Uber. There was a time when you used to get to the end of an Uber ride and you could only tip once you'd got out of the car and been told what the total journey was. And then someone realized that usually when you get out of the car, you're racing into the hotel, you're going to the meeting, you're doing, and you forget. And then you've got to think, oh, I forgot to tip. Bob was great and I didn't tip him. Then they said, let's try out tipping within the car in the journey. So you can tip in the journey if it's going well. And then, when you get out, you've got nothing else to do. I'm sure that innovation took experiments, it took research, obviously it took coding and development, but it was all about making the current business model better. And innovation in Horizon One is where you get your whole company working on how to make the current business better. It's what companies sometimes refer to as continuous improvement. In the 10x model of innovation, it's the sort of the 1x side of things before you get to your moonshots and everything else. But in this model, this is where you can say everybody's involved in currently making the current business better, more effective, touching more customers in a better way, and so on. So I think we can all and should all be able to find examples of Horizon One innovations.
Yeah, so what you're saying is, even though Uber itself disrupted an industry, and I'm sure we're going to get into that in future horizons, this is an incremental improvement that shows that even within an already innovative space, relatively speaking, there's room for improvement.
Always. And you want to get everybody working on that. And I think the scope of people involved is a very important concept of the Horizon model, because you're trying to get your whole company behind that. But it would be chaos if everybody in the company was, for example, trying to do Horizon 2. So as we go on to look at Horizon 2, you're looking at things like moving into a new country or adding a new capability that extends what your core platform does. Sometimes these are referred to as adjacencies. And you can't have the whole company looking at adjacencies, because if 30,000 people were all trying to decide what country to go into next, it would be chaos. So this is where you tend to look further, but fewer people are involved. And this is where you often have your business development team or your business expansion team. And sticking with the Uber example, a classic Horizon 2 would be going into a different city, but it could also be something like Uber Eats, where you're still doing a basic networking. A person wants the delivery of something. You're reusing the core model of driver and car for delivery, but you're having to add a whole new network of suppliers and a set of conditions and way it works, new screens that are quite different from the other ones, and you create Uber Eats. But 80% of the infrastructure, it's the same one. Routing the driver, paying the company. I mean, it's very similar. So this is why Horizon 2 is a change for a company, but often not a total out of the blue type of change. For it to be effective and for it to drive growth, it should reuse part of the existing infrastructure, even if it adds quite a lot to that infrastructure. Does that make sense, Chris?
It certainly does. One thing that pops into mind, since I live in the Bay Area and spend a lot of time in San Francisco, and I see a lot of cars with no people in them driving up and down the street. So that's a Waymo. And I know there's a partnership between Waymo and Uber. So I believe in cities like Phoenix, I'm not sure if it's here yet, but you could summon a driverless car from Waymo through the Uber app, at least there. Would you consider that to be a Horizon 1, 2, or is it something different now? Because Waymo itself, if you think about it, could be yet like the next disruptor in this entire space in the very way that
it's a great example, and I think it is the classic Horizon 3. When you've built your business around matching drivers to passengers, and not only matching them, but cultivating drivers, finding the number of drivers who are willing to participate in the platform, looking at their incentives, working out how to keep them working, but not working too much, rating them, right? The rating system, all of that represents core intellectual property for Uber. And something like driverless cars would completely blow all that away. 50% of the infrastructure would be different. So I think Uber itself looking at adopting driverless cars would be Uber being proactive in Horizon 3, thinking about an existential threat and embracing that in order to protect its franchise. But it's interesting how so many other companies are Horizon 3 threats to other companies. So if we think about Zscaler itself, Zscaler with its cloud architecture was a Horizon 3 threat to an on-prem security stack company. And that on-prem security company was busy innovating in Horizon 1, maybe going into different countries and adding products in Horizon 2, but they missed the fundamental threat, which was moving from on-prem to cloud, which was a Horizon 3 type event. And that Horizon 3 event is what Zscaler capitalized on to move into that. Salesforce Cloud would be another one. Everyone was selling on-prem CRM, and then Salesforce Cloud came in and disrupted them. So in Horizon 3, following the theme we talked about earlier, you usually have an even smaller number of people involved. It's usually the strategy people, the CEO, they're looking at threats, they're getting advice from consultants and so on. Or it's your entrepreneur that has a great idea who just sees that no one else is doing this, a bit like Jay did back in the day, and is willing to go out and test that Horizon 3 innovation. But again, in large companies, it helps to have this framework of the 3 horizons so that you're not trying to create a cultural asset where every single employee in every frontline job is thinking about Horizon 3 disruption to the business. That's really limited to who should think about that and the way they think about it. But sometimes when that's presented, people think, well, then I've got nothing to do with innovation. It's like, yes, you have. You've got all this Horizon 1 stuff to do. Let's get busy. Let's get innovating. Let's improve our business. So I like that framework because it separates the people, the purpose, the structure, and where people can add value, and creates a really good way for people to think about it.
That's excellent, Bruce. Now I have so many follow-up questions, but the one I really wanted to start with was when you look at the roles within an organization, and it doesn't matter which horizon it is, but it might. It depends on what your experience may have shown. But do you find that there's certain departments or certain roles and responsibilities that gravitate more toward the pursuit of any given horizon? So, for example, like a takeoff team or a center of excellence, they're really out there trying to figure out like what is coming up 5, 10 plus years and set the stage for Horizon 3. Whereas a CIO, CTO, or other technology leaders may be handling the 1 and 2.
Yeah, it is the dilemma about whose role it is to do what. I think by the time you get to the sort of C-suite level, everyone's role is to do everything in every horizon because you have to contribute your thoughts on everything. And it might be the tech innovation that leads the business people to think about a different business model, or it might be a different business model that drives the tech leader to think about new tech. I think everybody has their role to play in the different horizons. But as a CIO, their frame of reference is knowing who your stakeholders are in those different horizons. So to your point, there may be a very active, very innovative department somewhere in the front line that's doing more than its heavy lifting in innovating in their area because they're that kind of leader. The CIO might strive to have a very strong relationship with them, supporting them in their innovation and delivering enhanced value in Horizon 1. In looking at Horizon 2, the CIO most probably has to have more like a regular monthly check-in with the new business team to understand the new business horizons and where are they thinking of going next and what are they thinking of major feature function enhancement that might change demand. And then on the strategic side in Horizon 3, that might be the preserve of the once a year board retreat for 2 days where you're there with them really brainstorming threats to the business and new directions to go in. So the CIO can see themselves playing different roles with different relationships and stakeholders in each horizon. And that helps them describe to their own IT team how the incoming demand on them is going to hit them, for what purpose it's hitting them, where it's coming from, who are the stakeholders, who are the sponsors. And it gives them a way to talk about innovation that is structuring. And that gets you off your back foot, and it gets you onto the front foot as a CIO in a company that's committed to growth and committed to innovation.
That's great perspective. And, in previous episodes on this podcast, we learned quite a bit about that expanding role of the CIO, very different than just say even 10 years ago. We're going to pivot at this point and talk about how the technology itself, and maybe here's where you could draw from your experiences, helped you with some of the innovation that you're driving at, say, Centene, Fannie Mae, and other companies. You mentioned Zscaler. So yes, it's a cloud pioneer in zero trust, but generally speaking, cloud infrastructure, supporting innovation across all these horizons. Let's unpack that a bit. So perhaps we start with, how should a company approach the integration of public and private clouds? I still hear quite a bit about hybrid clouds, to help support the innovation potential from the IT perspective.
I think this is where you look at cloud from both the private and the off-prem hybrid, whichever way you look at it. You're looking at cloud as an agility enabler. The innovation is not slow anymore. When it comes, it's fast. Going back to that Horizon One example of tipping in the Uber ride, I'm sure that went out to one or two markets in test for a couple of months, and then it was everywhere in the world by Tuesday, right? That kind of demand is not your traditional scaling up 5-year long rollout plan of a new feature function set. It's very lumpy. And cloud as a discipline, which is sets of standards that allow for rapid expansion of capacity, whether that's to what you've bought on-prem or what you can burst to in public cloud, is fundamental to being able to support that kind of new demand stream. I think a lot of companies saw that firsthand at the beginning of the pandemic. If they'd already invested in a cloud solution like Zscaler for their VPN access, they burst from having 500 people working at home to having 50,000 people working at home without even thinking about it. Whereas if you were completely on-prem and constrained by capacity, you might have had 3 months of scaling up and difficulty in meeting that new demand in that new working model. So we can see how agility, flexibility, capacity are the keys to being able to respond to the business demand, whether that's an event like a pandemic or it's a innovative change in business model in any horizon. I think cloud is key. Add to that, you want it to be secure, then you start getting where zero trust comes in. So it's all part of the picture of having in your toolkit as a CIO the tools necessary to respond when that innovation demand hits you.
Do you have any examples where the innovation, let me rephrase it, like you have all these industries and you have more and more reliance on the cloud. Do you see disruption and new models happening faster in certain industries as we go forward, or is it going to be pretty even? For instance, in hospitals, I know there's quite a bit of change happening. Change needs to happen given how expensive the cost of medical services are. Do you see disruption happening there, or is it going to be more on the automotive side, like we were talking about throughout, or transportation side, or anywhere else where it goes beyond scaling and beyond lift and shift and into something entirely new because of the delivery model?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot in your question, Chris. It's a great question, but there's a lot to unpack. If we were to talk about what drives change in industry, we get into a conversation about who extracts which rents where in an ecosystem and what their moral, political, or practical ability is to resist change that changes those rents and what they pay and so on. So I think change is necessarily complex. But what I would say is that historically, change would have been one company trying to do everything in the space that they now want to conquer. And increasingly, the model is to partner to bring about change. And partnering to bring about change is because you can't always extract and reduce all that friction and get rid of all those rents and move immediately from where we are today to a perfectly envisaged technology-enabled model. Somewhere along the path of change, you might need to, cooperate with partners, bring other people into the fence, into the camp rather, and improve some of the way the existing system works. For that, you're linking lots of different venues together. You're linking different data sets, different execution venues into value chains that extend across infrastructures. And when you start having to do that in order to meet those innovation demands, that's where cloud, again, with a zero trust model, starts to become absolutely a prerequisite. It's not just acquisitions, it's partnerships. And I think increasingly, to meet that complex change agenda, to bring change into systems that really need it, it's going to be done through partnerships, not by disruption as much as we may have seen in some of the earlier iterations where Uber disrupted the taxi service. I think the ones that are left are complicated, difficult, and will change only through the partnership model rather than the full disruption model. It's my opinion. We'll see next 10 years, but that's how I think about it today, Chris.
In part 2, we'll go deeper into the technological and leadership needs for secure innovation, covering topics like scalability and providing a great user experience. We'll also uncover insights into how zero trust security can support growth and maintain competitiveness. We've been listening to Bruce Lee, a CXO advisor at Zscaler, who was previously the CTO of Centene, the nation's largest government healthcare program payer. Prior to Centene, Bruce was the CIO and head of technology and operations at Fannie Mae, providing the infrastructure for the U.S. secondary mortgage market. He also has served as global CIO of the New York Stock Exchange and its affiliated exchanges around the world. You can learn more about Bruce on his profile page on CXO Revolutionaries. Thank you to our sponsor, Zscaler, and please subscribe to the podcast using your favorite audio listening service. Lastly, please visit zscaler.com/CXO Revolutionaries/events to learn more about upcoming executive experiences where you can meet with us and connect with your community.
Thanks for listening to the CIO Evolution. Check back with your podcast provider regularly for more episodes. You can find more episodes along with other podcasts on the CXO Revolutionaries website at revolutionaries.zscaler.com. Statements by Zscaler podcasters and guests are informational only and should never be construed as legal advice. You should consult your legal advisor on matters related to you or your business. Zscaler makes no warranties, express, implied, or statutory as to the content of this podcast, and it is provided as is. Content on this podcast may contain forward-looking statements that are current as of the date of the recording and subject to change. These statements are subject to the safe harbor provisions created by the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995. Full legal disclaimers are available at revolutionaries.zscaler.com. Copyright 2021.